you're the captain of your fate. Just work hard. You could, stop making excuses. Get up, boy. Go out and get a job. Pull your pants up. Hold your head up high.
Hey folks, how you doing? My name is Tim Black. Welcome to a new edition of the Tim Black Show. My first guest officially for the Power Hour is a noted scholar, economist, and public intellectual. He's the Henry Cohen Professor of Economics and Urban Policy, a university professor, and the founding director of the Institute for the Study of Race, Stratification and Political Economy at the New School. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Darrick Hamilton. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Happy to be on your show.
Man, like I was telling you off air, you are someone I greatly admire, and my audience is in for a humongous treat. Ladies and gentlemen, let's jump into this. Dr. Darrick, he wrote the preface for the Ice Cube Contract for Black America. He's done so many other things. Check out his TED Talk. What inspired you, Dr. Darrick Hamilton, to write this preface? And when you say the preface, how much of this is you?
The preface? I mean, I wrote the preface, so that's all me. I guess the inspiration is Ice Cube and his colleagues themselves. The fact that they are interested in using their platform and audience to actually affect change, and it's a great document. So I was proud and honored to be able to sign on and endorse it with a preface.
Absolutely, it's a great document, and that, folks, that's him being humble. It's a great piece of work. In fact, one of the things I run into, Doctor, is I have phone line show. I open phone lines on Tuesdays and Fridays, and people call in, and the amount of misinformation that's out there is a mountain. You understand what I'm saying? So when they pick up this document, they're going to immediately learn things that is not taught in the mainstream media. It's not taught in corporate media. Maybe if they went to your school, they would learn it. But generally speaking, people have no idea. You talk about what inspired you as well, Doctor. You say here that George Floyd. How could you expand on that a little bit about how the George Floyd murder or execution or lynching, however you want to describe it, how did that impact this study?
Yeah, and let me be, what I was trying to say is that I'm giving praise to Ice Cube and his colleagues for writing the contract with America. I wrote the preface, and I certainly endorsed the document, but I wasn't tooting my own horn when I was giving a shout out. So, but to answer the question, George Floyd vividly demonstrates the manner in which Black lives are devalued in interaction with law enforcement, and we've known that for a long time. Perhaps one could argue that the nation is coming to grips with it, in large part because we got video documentation with cell phones in ways that, I'm not telling you something that you're not familiar with. But here's the point, and here's the point of their contract with Black America, that we can devalue Black lives and interactions with law enforcement. It's not a leap to understand how Black lives are devalued in larger political economy. And in fact, because we have limited resources, that limits our power and our ability to fight back when we have interactions with law enforcement that are lethal and immoral. To me, that's a bigger point, that we can link the manner in which simply by having an identity that's stigmatized, in Black, that a priori, any type of transaction you engage in is you are less than someone else. You get education has a return. That's not a surprise. You would expect that those people that have more credentials and have been in school a longer time, that should lead to a labor market reward. But the fact that your Blackness is a distractor, that's a problem. And again, that's not deep. We've understood that for a long time. But perhaps the nation is being able to see that it's not just law enforcement, it's larger political economy interaction. And, Ice Cube has recognized and is calling for an overhaul. He's saying that, it's been far too long. This is enough, especially in the context of this political season with a presidential election on the line. He's demanding justice. He's demanding that this intolerable devaluation of somebody because they are Black is immoral and needs to change.
I definitely agree with him, and you're right, this is not new. We've come to this conclusion. One of the things that concerned me at the outset was, wow, I wish we were talking about this during the primaries. I wish we'd have got on this in 2019. Just the timing of it all. Now that we're down to Biden and people are reluctant to give Trump, to really voice it, because now that means, Trump, and I know there's Green Party candidates, Howie Hawkins and Angela Walker, these are great people, but basically, based on our system, it's two birds, two wings of the same bird. Basically, people feel caught in a bind. What would you say to folks who say, "Wow, we needed this early. We need everything earlier"? What would you say to that, Doctor?
Well, you may or may not know, I was a huge supporter of Bernie Sanders. So I think Bernie Sanders had an economic Bill of Rights platform that would have brought about justice. I think Bernie Sanders' evolution was one where he really grasped the notion of race, particularly with regards to criminal justice reform. And to me, that speaks to his integrity. I think that if you look at, in part, some of the transformations from 2016 to this primary, he evolved a lot. And you would want to have people that hear things and change. If they don't, then that lacks integrity. Matter of fact, that's probably the thing that endeared me to him the most. You may or may not agree with him on everything, but the man is grounded in integrity. And it's almost the opposite of what we have in the White House. We have somebody that has clearly demonstrated a capacity to tell bold-faced lies and double down on those lies. If you can't even start from a place of integrity, then, again, that's an immorality where that's not a place where you can affect change. You can't convince that person. You got to remove them. So that speaks to where we are now. You asked the question about Biden, Trump in this dilemma that we're in. W.E.B. Du Bois wrote an excellent essay when he talked about voting, and it was titled, I forgot what the title was, but the main point was that there's no such thing as a lesser of two evils. There's only evil. And I generally believe in that framework. I don't so easily just go with the Democratic frontrunner if I'm not aligned with that person in terms of values. But I will say this: Donald Trump is something different. That when people say that he's a threat to our democracy, a threat to our livelihood and existence, his handling of this COVID-19 crisis, the man is narcissistic to the point where he will sacrifice the lives of whomever in order to meet his goals. I think he's demonstrated that. So we are at a point where he has to be removed first and foremost. And I'm at the point where, let me say on the other end of the ticket, Harris, she has, there's the record she has in California. Some people might critique it, some might not. But in Congress, when she's in the Senate, a lot of her proposals have been very progressive. I can pinpoint and talk about a lot of things where she has promoted racial as well as economic equity, and she's done it in a bold way. Sometimes politicians shy away from race. I don't think she has. So, I see another evolution in a person. So those are all positives. But here's the bottom line. At the end of the day, social movements, things like Movement for Black Lives and various other social movements, we make the politicians do it. We build the power and make them to do it ultimately. But sadly, somebody like Donald Trump, he's a con artist. He has conned many people and defrauded many people in ways that it's hard to negotiate with a person like that. They're not reasonable. But there is the possibility that a Biden-Harris administration can be coerced or encouraged to do these big, bold ideas that we need to really bring about race and economic justice.
Well, I'd strongly agree that, evolution is so important when it comes to politics, and that it's our job to push politicians towards the results we're looking for. We are the constituents. So we vote with our vote. We choose with our votes. We sort of like a consumer decides who wins in the market by our purchases, so to speak. But if I don't push back a little bit on a Kamala,
Please.
then our comment section is going to be riddled because they already got Jamal Bowman and Isaiah James because I didn't push back much. Do you think that you acknowledge that her past reputation or her history as Attorney General, as a prosecutor, these things are problematic? Is that indicative of who she was then, or who is she really? Is she a chameleon, or are we just saying she's transformed because that would be beneficial or expedient right now?
I mean, I take her to be. I don't question whether she's disingenuous or not. I certainly wouldn't say that. I'm confident she has integrity. So I believe that. And like I said, the more recent actions that she's taken, and you can look at some of the bills she's proposed, including guaranteeing income. You can look at some of her policies with regards to redressing communities that have suffered a lot from evictions, and even her willingness to be full-throated about race. To me, to say that she is somebody that can be pushed with social movements, and as well as has the desire to bring about more economic inclusion, civic engagement, and social equity. So I don't want to skate your question. I mean, I think the point is, I think a point is evolution and also integrity. Be grounded in integrity, like I said. You know.
Yeah, it's an important question and important conversation because, for all intents and purposes, I mean, I see her. If they win, I'm really looking at Kamala as being the top of the ticket. I mean, that's just the way that I envision. I mean, Joe Biden is, older gentleman, and none of us are getting any younger. And I do see Kamala as it. So de facto, I mean, I know that's kind of a strong term, but I think she would be considered the president to most people. That's what people, people look at Joe Biden and think one term, Dr. Hamilton. So have that conversation, I think is important.
I mean, if we think about a historical context, who would have thought Joe Biden would have been a pivot from the first self-identified Black president onto the first potentially self-identified Black woman president? That's interesting, I'll just say.
And I try to be, cautious and respectful because I know how I felt when Obama, back in 2008, man, I was like, wow, this is amazing. I never thought I'd see it in my lifetime. And that feeling that I know Black women have, I know that Indian women have, that Asian women have, women in general probably have. I want to be respectful of that because, now you want to do a white glove test, Tim Black, where was the white glove in 2008? So I've gotten it from both sides, believe me.
Although here I'm going to push a little further and say we got to get beyond the politics of, I don't know, what's the word we want to call it, of celebrity, right? That we can have dinner and hang out with celebrities and stuff like that, or go see their concert or watch their movie. But politics is life or death, so that can't be persuasive enough from my perspective. And even having somebody who's Black in office, that's not enough. I'd rather have a white person that's going to bring justice than a Black person who won't. And not saying that either, that's not a critique on them. Although, there are lots of things I wish Obama would have did more of, certainly. And I have had some critiques of him in my past. But like I said, I wouldn't equate Kamala Harris with Barack Obama. I think she has proposed a lot more progressive policies. When I was being tongue in cheek talking about Joe Biden as a pivotal person because, he did that crime bill. Maybe this is not the appropriate time to bring it up, given the existential threat that Donald Trump poses. But he got to be accountable to it. There's a debt for him to pay for some of the policies that were problematic. But again, that said, and I'm gonna stop being redundant and repetitive. Donald Trump has to go, and Joe Biden. I also participated in that Unity Task Force, and the people that are working with him, I believe they engaged us with good faith and reason and listened. So that I give them kudos for that. I think that they're I would push them more to recognize that the federal government has capacities beyond perhaps what they're saying the federal government has capacity. So in other words, thinking of fiscal constraints as an argument by which we can't have some of our big, bold policy agendas. You know, we need to get beyond that. We've seen with that first CARES Act, our capacity to raise and distribute trillions of dollars at a drop of a dime. We've seen massive tax cuts pass in recent history. There's a great book by my good friend and colleague Stephanie Kelton called The Deficit Myth, which outlines the reality that in terms of monetary power, the federal government can do a whole lot, and that the constraints on the ability to do a whole lot have not been realized in a very long time. Constraints such as inflation, we haven't dealt with inflation in a very long time, or constraint on the capacity of the federal government to raise money at very low, at very low cost with low interest rates compared to the capacity by which we can grow. At issue is how we spend that money. If we're spending that money in ways that facilitate wealthy people to not only accumulate greater resources for themselves to hoard, and I don't begrudge them for all the money they have. The problem is the political power that comes along with that money. All those resources that can be converted into defining the rules and structures in ways that can facilitate and keep feeding themselves. That's not a good way to spend money. If instead we're using or spending money on, a military industrial or prison industrial complex, that's another immoral way to spend money. If instead we're spending money on America's greatest resource, which is its people, now that's a better way to spend money. To use those federal dollars to ensure that we have economic rights and to redress our immoral racism, sexism, sexual orientationism, whatever, the ability to devalue somebody because of an identity, that's a problem. And we can do better, and we have the capacity to do better.
We must do better.
And we must do better.
We must do better. And also, and just to piggyback off what you said, it's also it's not that we begrudge them the money per se, it's the exploitation of our workers who and the carnage of them in building that wealth that becomes the problem. And you lay out here about the wealth disparity, the wealth gap, and how I think there's one part where we talk about even college is not a fix forward. I think that's from one of your speeches. That's what it is, because I was watching your TED Talk. You were saying how it's not a panacea. The people who go to college, black kids that go to college, don't always do better than white counterparts who drop out of high school. Could you expand on that part?
I think education has become a political ruse. I think notions around equal opportunity and framing inequality as an opportunity gap, that's rhetoric that distracts us from the resources themselves that lead to disparity. We think of education as an input, but two things. One is we exaggerate it as an input and its capacity to address racial inequality in particular. So there's no question that a black person with more education tends to have more income, more wealth, better health outcomes than a black person with less education. But if we look at education across race, not only do we find that disparity persists with education, it oftentimes gets worse. So a mortality statistic, we know that between the ages of 25 and 64, black people have a 50% higher mortality rate than white people. If we look at blacks and whites with a college degree, that statistic goes to 70%. So a black person with a college degree has a 70% higher mortality rate than a white person with a college degree. And you might ask why. One of the things I argue is that it is the stress, the stigma of trying to work so hard to overcome the everyday burdens that actually might manifest in some of these health disparities. So when somebody tells you to work twice as hard to get by, one question we rarely ask is, at what cost? What does it cost you to overachieve in a context of racism and other forms of other structural barriers that you face on every day. I think it manifests in your health. That's one mechanism. So, I went on a long rant, but
excellent. In fact, you remind me, I remember when I was coming up, Doctor, my mom used to say, we got to work twice as hard to get half as far. And that's a way to inspire you and motivate you. But as you pointed out, not very healthy. Not very healthy to work twice as hard. There's also the conservative viewpoint of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and the grit and determination will somehow put you in place where you need to be and somehow raise you and your children up. But that's not always the case. And the hardest working people I've ever known were poor people, low wage workers. They work harder than anybody else.
Yep.
Working on their roof, getting another roof. Each time they finish the roof, they just get another roof.
Yeah. But it's such a compelling narrative, isn't it? That, you're the captain of your fate. Just work hard. You can, stop making excuses. Get up, boy. Go out and get a job. Pull your pants up. Hold your head up high. That's a compelling narrative because it tells you that you can actually do something to change your circumstance. And if I have a child, I'm going to tell my child, get up and go to work and work hard. If I'm perhaps a preacher in a sermon, I might say that as well to try to motivate somebody. But if I'm a policymaker, I can't tell you to work twice as hard to get by. It's my job to facilitate environments so that you can get the proper return, just like anybody else, from your efforts, and to make sure that you have adequate resources so that you can achieve your desired goals. That has to be my job, not to motivate you to work twice as hard. That's the difference. And, again, I'm not saying education is bad. I'm a university professor. I'd be a hypocrite to encourage people to go to college if I thought it was not a hypocrite. I'd be an exploiter if I encourage you to go to college and I don't think there's a return to it. But there's intrinsic value in education. It in and of itself is worth investing in. There's power and joy in being able to understand and synthesize information into big ideas. That's reason enough. But things like, medical care, health care, everybody should have access to medical care in the 21st century. We should have Medicare for all. We should not be rationing health care based on for-profit motives. And when you're most vulnerable, when you're sick, finance should not be the thing on your mind. The stigma and burden of finance should not be at issue when you're going to see a doctor because you're sick. And we can do this in our society. We have provisions to make sure that's true, that occurs. I know I'm talking a lot. Last thing I'll say is that education being a political ruse, me saying that, we exaggerate the functional role of education to the detriment of understanding the functional roles of wealth itself and power. It ain't just wealth, it's also political power and power in general. That thinking that all you need is education to get those things, that becomes distraction because you also need resources and power. In fact, if you got wealth, you can buy education. We have literally seen that take place with some of the scandals that are going on. Obviously, we don't want that to occur, but that's what we need to know. We need to shift the onus of inequality from individuals onto where it properly belongs, and that is the public, as a result of resource deprivation historically, as well as not providing the provisions of what people need in terms of enabling goods so that they can achieve and be successful. Beyond political and civil rights, we need economic rights. If you want to vote, you shouldn't be hungry, period. And we shouldn't have people that don't have proper housing, that are hungry. There's certain goods and services that at baseline, public should be providing provisions for. After that, if you want to be a capitalist, if you want to be a socialist, a lot of that is jargon as far as I'm concerned anyway. But economic rights as a baseline is what we need. And I'm not being dismissive of capitalism and socialism, but we don't, none of them do we actually practice in their purest. When we bail out Wall Street, that damn sure ain't capitalism, right? That you might say that's fascism, but
I hear you. I was thinking that just to give you a little background on how this has context for my audience. I have a diverse audience of Black and white, Hispanic, Asian people from all across the country. And when you speak and you say and you break down the disparities between Black and white, see, a lot of people when they say pull yourself up by your bootstraps, doctor, they are imagining or fantasizing about a country where everything's equal. And they look at it from their white perspective that, I just had to work harder. And they look at their friends who didn't work hard. They looked at their friends who fell victim to, drugs or alcohol or any other, series of issues that people have. And they tend to see the world as everyone's at the same position. And that's just not reality. So when we have these conversations and we give them the information, it's like a wake-up call. They start to realize this, that there is a different country. It's not just jargon. They hear MSNBC say it, but I don't think they really embrace it or really understand and accept it to be factual, that there's a different America. So doctor, I know we talk about the racial wealth gap, and I think I've talked about the term of like 10% for every dollar a white family has, a Black family has 10%. Is that on point? Is that accurate in your analysis?
At the median, the typical Black family has 10 cents on the dollar as a typical white family. That's true, and it's been pretty persistent. If we talk about the mean, and then we could talk a little bit about distributions and measures. So the median is typical. That's the middle household. The mean is skewed by the fact that you have high concentrations of wealth at the top. So when I give you the mean figure for whites, it's about $933,000, but the median figure for whites is $171,000. So no matter how you look at it, whites have tremendously, exponentially more wealth than Blacks. But the typical white household is not a millionaire. So the mean becomes a misleading indicator of well-being when we talk about wealth because of its skewedness, the fact that it's so skewed. Now, what is true is that however concentrated wealth is amongst the few, there are hardly any Black billionaires. But, if we're talking about racial justice, you would want a distribution of wealth where you have similar proportions of Blacks as whites at every level of distribution of wealth. However, if you're thinking about economic justice, if we were to replicate the white distribution of wealth, that's not economic justice. If we were to create a class of Black billionaires that mirrored the white billionaire class, that's not bringing economic justice. So when addressing wealth inequality, we need to think about overall distribution as well as where Blacks are all along that distribution. So we need both racial and economic justice when it comes to wealth. And then you made the point about some whites and in your audience and thinking about these narratives. So let me go back to that real quick and say that white people don't pull themselves up by the bootstrap, and that's a narrative. Black people don't, white people don't. I'm not the first to tell you this. You've heard this before. It's cliche. You need some bootstraps to pull yourself up by in the first place. Of course, I didn't originally come up with that. But here's the point. The narrative of pull yourself up by the bootstrap being racialized allows it to persist in our economy. So we define deserving and undeserving in very racialized terms. So if the imagery is of a welfare queen, of a deadbeat dad, and of a super predator, then that mythology around inequality is allowed to persist, that all you got to do is work harder. And we apply it to white people also. So you got poor white people that get very racialized when we talk about poverty. We characterize them as dysfunctional, deficient. I'm not the first person to say this either. The term white trash is meant to call them something other than white, to add the label trash to in order to talk about white poverty. So race has that effect, but then there's another effect as well. Having this racial stratification leads to material and psychological benefits for white people, even if they're poor. And this is an immoral material and psychological benefit, and it's predicated on defining economic well-being in these immoral, self-interested, accumulative terms that know no bounds, that are unjust. And there are alternative ways of defining economic well-being that I think younger generations are moving towards. When we see white and black people in the streets, right, both clamoring that Black Lives Matter, they're redefining economic well-being. But here's the point: the material and psychological benefits of white privilege afford poor whites a higher relative status than poor blacks. And sadly, people care not only about their absolute positioning, they care about their relative positioning as well. So the more unequal we become vertically, the more susceptible we are to divisive messages and the prevalence of immoral things like white privilege.
And when we talk about white privilege, man, we get a lot of pushback because people talk about how their lives were difficult. They didn't have it easy, no silver spoon. But what they don't get is what Chris Rock said. Chris Rock had this joke about Oprah Winfrey money. Remember that? And Bill Gates money. And if Oprah's rich, but Bill Gates is wealthy, and if Bill Gates woke up tomorrow with Oprah's money, you know this, he'd jump out a window and slit his throat on the way down. Well, the average white family doesn't realize, even if they think they're broke, you know where I'm going. If they woke up tomorrow and they were black broke, as described by Dr. Hamilton here, they jump out a window too. It'd probably be on a lower floor. They can't afford to live, but they'd be in the same boat. So I think that education is the way we do it. Is it okay to refer more to the document, or am I getting into more cube land when I go into the actual contract? Because there is so much in here. I don't want to overlook it if I should be focusing on it.
Oh no, I'm happy to talk about anything in there, and like I said, shout out to them and credit to them for putting pen to paper and coming up with that. But I also want to mention two things. You brought up Chris and Dave Chappelle. They are genius, both of them. I mean, straight up, the ways, and by the way, that also speaks to the fact of why humanities and I would put comedians as humanistic scholars, because they are well thought about understanding the human condition, and oftentimes brilliant in their ways in translating the human condition in a narrative that makes us laugh. It's hard to make somebody laugh. And two Chris Rock jokes resonate with me. One in a way that I think is really problematic, and the other that I think is brilliant. And that is the one that I'll lead with this problematic is when he said, "I love black people." Okay, so you already know it, but I hate you. So that was all part of the framework of my generation that came up and got seduced by neoliberal economics, where we really felt that there are things we could do to pull ourselves up. He didn't say pull yourself up by the bootstrap, but it's a bootstrap narrative, as if those other black people, something's wrong with them, if they would only act right. Of course, you got good and bad apples in any population, but that the characterizing a group of people as is like that and making a distinction between black people, I think has been problematic with even our own internal narrative. The other joke that I thought was brilliant was his marker of what success would mean, which is the ability for a black person to be mediocre. We fight for the right to be great, but to end up in a situation where you can be mediocre and still be fine, I'm not advocating for mediocrity, but that's justice. And that was the joke you just raised when he said, I'm the brilliant comedian, and guess who I live next to? A white dentist. So that was the point. And then,
absolutely, man. And as you outlined it, and as I thought about it this time, for the first time, man, because I hated that joke, Doc. I really hated that joke. I said, this brother, this sellout, why is he saying? and what it was is that
I ain't calling him a sellout.
But you know what it is? So many white folks and people of bad intention, white folks, I should say, use that.
Yeah.
They use it to this day. Well, I like this person. Yeah, but that's a little different. Right. It's a little different. Because they got some of them in their family, they're cousins. Yeah. That's my cousin, but he, But
and by the way, you remember when Barack Obama was on the campaign slump, using terms like Pookie, Ray Ray. That was also extremely problematic.
Yeah, yeah.
We should call that out too, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. You, in fact, here in the preface, you called it out. Governments coerce, incentivize, insinuate defective Black people to behave accordingly and make better choices or better decisions, as if the responsibility is on the on the person themselves. That's why they're in a position that they're in. Also,
you Dr. that reference. I was trying to be subtle, but you got
it. But you're not alone. You're not alone in that. Dr. Darrick said the same thing. He said the only problem he had with the contract for Black America was that part where he felt.
I do have one reservation, though, about the way in which the contract is framed, because I think at the outset there's a description of a set of responsibilities that Black people have to fulfill. And I think, unfortunately, the way that is worded, it plays into the notion that Black people are in some way responsible for the kind of conditions that we are confronted with, that it's a consequence of our own behavior. And that section of the contract says that we have to make a commitment to change our behavior. And I think that much of our behavior is actually actions that we take as a consequence of the conditions that we are faced with. And if we really want to talk about changing things, we've got to change those conditions rather than change the way in which Black people behave.
I saw his point that some white folks would take that and say, see, they don't want it. See, they're not working hard. Do you have a response for that?
Well, I don't have the specific reference that you're referring to, and I'm sure you can give it, but let me just say this. If you read that document and that's the conclusion you come away from with that document, that it's not about resources, but framing inequality as some deficit within Black people, I don't think I think you got the wrong interpretation from that document. But one could nitpick and perhaps find some particular area where one could draw that conclusion, and maybe we can talk about it. But overall, that certainly is not the tenure of that document.
Yeah, I think it was like one of the last pillars of the contract, where he said, well, we're going to do this. I thought it was more of aspirational. Well, I went to the Million Man March. I got some and when Louis Farrakhan was saying, Black men, certain things we need to do. We need to take ownership of our families. We need to protect our women. We need to be more active with our children. I felt that was reasonable. I didn't look at it like we weren't doing that, but just we could do better. But I'll breeze past that. I don't want to create an issue.
You don't have to. We can talk about anything. But then let me also make a point of where the onus of responsibility is keenly on us. And that is collective organizing. And we are doing it. People are taking to the streets and starting to, Ice Cube doing this political movement. He doesn't have to do this. Man got money, right? So he ain't gonna take hits from it. He got people like Sandy critiquing him. He don't have to do this. He could be a happy millionaire, right? And make jokes. But he's using his fame and fortune and platform in a way to promote greater equity and inclusion beyond himself. And that is the onus and responsibility on us. The onus is on us to be beyond voting. We got to, vote, definitely get Trump out of office, but political power is well beyond that. It is collectively organizing, and that's where we can attain power through efficacy of politics and being reasonable and smart in that domain, I think.
I would agree, and you're right. It is beyond just showing up every 4 years and voting, and then going down and hitting every Democratic box and saying, okay, I did my part, and then going back to doing your regular life. No, we need people to get involved. We need people to, and it's not just voting the top of the ticket. It's your sheriffs, the people that impact your life on a daily basis. And also we were talking about, hey, maybe you don't want to be a congressman, but there's some room on the school board. You know, this you can get involved in. Maybe you don't want to be a politician, but maybe you can help somebody else win. I know there's a few people running who could use some volunteers. If so, the point is we could all be involved in this process.
Yeah.
And we also pointed out how in some countries, if you don't vote, you get fined.
Yeah.
In America, you can get fined if you vote.
Yeah, exactly. You get incarcerated.
There you go.
You black and vote. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, so much.
Senator Sanders went so far as to say, their movement to, I shouldn't even use this word re-enfranchise, that's not even the right word, but to stop the immoral exclusion of formerly incarcerated people from voting. But Senator Sanders went so far, and I think he's right to say that just because you're incarcerated doesn't mean you're not a citizen. You should still vote, even incarcerated.
And you heard the pushback from my friends, right? But the warden would then coerce them to vote a certain way and force them to vote. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, if you get evidence of this imaginary warden that's actually following people, like, how would he even know how they voted? Like, what are we talking about? How would you? So anything to keep people disenfranchised, and I felt that's what that was doing. There's a part in here about banking, and you're an economist, I know. They talk about redlining, and I don't know if you wrote this or who wrote this, but it says, while redlining was made illegal in '68 with the passage of the Fair Housing Act, then again with the '77 Community Reinvestment Act, the CRA, statistics show the perpetuation of de facto redlining in many of the same communities, most notably Black community, still exists. And studies consistently show Blacks are denied access to lending in roughly the same percentages as before the Act's passage. So when I heard that, I said, so you mean to tell me we passed the Act? This is what he's saying. The Act passed and things should be good now. And people say it all the time. Just get over it, Tim Black. You're looking back, you need to look forward. There you go, living in the past. This says that we were. Yeah. 30, 40 years later, 50 years later, past the actual Fair Housing Act.
Yeah.
Doctor, without reparations, how do we, obviously laws changing didn't do it. So but besides reparations, how do you see righting this ship?
I'm a supporter of reparations, but I also recognize reparations won't be enough either. So you kind of asked multiple questions in that one.
I did.
Right? I'd say reparations is necessary if we're ever going to have racial justice. Simple, plain as that. But reparations is not enough because we have a system where capital does what it does best, which is accumulate, iterate, and concentrate in ways that creates haves and have-nots. So we need an economic Bill of Rights framework in conjunctions with reparations. Reparations also is a one-time policy, generally, that presumably once the debt is paid, there's a time in which you move on. But the ways in which economics and politics work is that you need government to constantly facilitate resources in a way to counteract some of the concentration that takes place almost naturally with capital and politics. And what do I mean by economic Bill of Rights? We've been talking about it. Things like a federal job guarantee, things like baby bonds that ensures that at birth everybody has capital, things like Medicare for all, things like tuition-free education from grade school all the way through college without the stigma and burden of debt. I can keep going. Things like a right to housing, enabling goods that without them, you really don't have authentic agency in your life. That's what I'm talking about with economic Bill of Rights. So you need all of those things. But, also to get at one of the other aspects of your question, Ibram Kendi, in his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, makes it clear and evident that if policy is not intentionally anti-racist in both its design and implementation, then that's not enough. And you pointed out policies that had anti-racist elements to them. They obviously weren't sufficient. They didn't have, CRA doesn't have enough bite to it. But the point about making redlining illegal, that wasn't anti-racist enough. because the legacies of the existing structures just continue to perpetuate themselves. That you need some active action intervention to counteract some of the things that have taken place in the past. That would be one of my interpretations of his brilliant analytical framing of ways in which policy, even well-meaning policy directed at income or political exclusion, needs to be actively anti-racist. And, we should say anti-sexist as well. We should recognize that history with women as well. So those two things have to be active in thinking about our policy frames if we want to be economically just. What else? There was one other point I wanted to make. Let me see if I can remember, or did I forget it? The other thing is it's gone even further. In addition to redlining still being a thing, there are two other aspects that we need to be concerned with, which is reverse redlining, where you use these demarcations of indicators of race to not only not offer them prime products, but actively go at them with extractive, exploitative subprime products. And that has gone on as well. And that is understanding in our political economy framework that it's not just economic power and political power, that one's identity is linked to power as well. So Black people were exploitable because they were Black in a lot of the last foreclosure crises that took place. When we see narratives and emails of banks calling people mud people that's not even a euphemism for Black, as a derogatory term for Black people, it's indicative of a vulnerability because of your life being devalued because of your race. One last thing I'll say is that in thinking about neighborhoods and policies and race, we need to be concerned about hastening gentrification and hastening capital to come in and exploit and extract under the nomenclature of incentivizing resources into these dilapidated neighborhoods. So, for example, if you offer tax abatements in areas that are predominantly Black, it's not as if many cases, the existing residents have the capital to benefit from that abatement in the first place. You're subsidizing capital that aren't the intended recipients to come in and benefit from those policies. So we need to be careful and guarded in the types of policies, even well-meaning policies that we implement are racialized in a way that further hasten inequality.
I was thinking opportunity zones.
Yeah, you said it.
I didn't want to interrupt you though, but I was thinking of, because brother, you don't know how many times, Dr. Hamilton, that I hear, but Trump gave you opportunity zones, and Senator Tim Scott
started. So.
Yeah, and I'm like, well, who's taking advantage? Who's taking advantage of that? Instead, people who already have capital. Same thing goes for the stocks that you keep telling me about. We talk about how good the economy's doing. How much stock do you have in Amazon or in Apple? Not me. I don't have any. So, the average American's money is tied up in their mortgage, not in their stock. And when Black folks are losing their 45% of Black businesses closed during this COVID-19, we should talk about that as well. I know it's a lot all over the place, but I guess I'm just too excited that I got an authority on this subject. Please debunk the opportunity zone being so good for working people, and Black people should be happy about it.
I mean, you just did. I'm just going to reiterate your points, but anytime you hear the word opportunity, be a little nervous, right? Again, I think we use that as a ruse all the time when we talk about opportunity. That be scared when you hear that word. I'm not saying every time, but oftentimes you got to see what's coming after that. But you hit it right on the point. Trying to incentivize capital to come in and develop or lead to economic activity in an area. Well, who's going to benefit from it, and who are you offering subsidies to where they can use their existing power to get even more power to be more extractive and more exploitive? What we need to understand is that government does not need private equity in order to develop and improve neighborhoods. There's public power enough where you can give direct grants to the people that you desire to have economic opportunity for in the first place. So, that's a better way to do it. Why? There's some Black people with ingenuity, with grit, all these terms that we talk about, that what they lack? They lack capital. So if providing them direct capital in the first place, that would be sufficient in what we would need.
COVID-19 has been, if that doesn't show the state of differences that we have, different Americas that we live in, I don't know what does. The rate of infection, the lack of recovery, the number of businesses closed in the Black community. I discovered the 45% number from the Contract for Black America. I didn't know that number was so high. And some say that some of those businesses are not going to come back because the market, these people can't sustain. They can't just shut down. They got to keep paying the bills. They got to keep paying the rent. Or there's no moratorium. Is there a moratorium on the rent for the small business owner? Like what set asides do they get? So I don't know if you could speak to that, but COVID-19, how does that intercede with where we are and what needs to be done to kind of put Black people in a position where they could excel instead of die off?
Yeah. And we hear, the good thing is we're having a good conversation that's fun and we have some levity in it, but this is serious, right? You and I both know these are people's lives. People have vested sweat equity, their health. We talked about it earlier into this. And then they were vulnerable, not because of anything they did or didn't do, but simply because they were undercapitalized to begin with to this pandemic. That's the root of it. The root of it is Black businesses lack capital. Even the types of businesses that we have are more vulnerable because they're not deep in capital in the first place. And another point that we should make is that sometimes Black businesses itself is the outcome of labor market discrimination and limited ability to work as a worker, right? We would desire for Black people to have the same capacities to engage in entrepreneurship as any other people. But we also should recognize that there are many Black people who have limited opportunities and access to the formal labor market in a way that pushes them into business ownership or entrepreneurship. That we want people to be pulled, not pushed into entrepreneurship. That should be a key point. And then, the other aspect of the federal policies as it related to COVID-19 that disproportionately hurt Black businesses was the relationship with banking in the first place. The fact that we distributed a lot of the loans and the loans that turned into grants through banks, in which a priori, because we had limited capital and limited ethnic relationships with banks, there were not lines of credits in the first place to receive those loans in a timely manner, or just receive them periodly. So, periodly, I made up a word, period. But and that brings us back to the Economic Bill of Rights, where there won't be one silver bullet to address our conditions, but that we got to think about finance, we got to think about income, we got to think about jobs, we got to think about health, education. There's a package of goods and services that we need to implement to have a moral and just economy.
As you broke that down, Doctor, all I was thinking was about the people that say that this whole COVID-19 thing is a ruse, that it's meant to hurt Trump. I've never heard anyone ever, Doctor, say maybe it's meant to hurt Black people. If it's killing more Black people than white people and pushing more Black people out of business after the bank crisis, the housing crisis that we not even recovered from back in 2007, then where are my conspiracy theorists to point the gun that way and say, well, maybe it's not against Trump, it's against Black people? I never hear these type of conspiracies, but I hear them constantly about Donald Trump and about the conservative side of things. That's not really a question. That's more me just ranting from being exposed to these far reach, these people with these ideas of what's happening without any data to prove it. Of course, politics, you use whatever you can. That's what they do. They use things to their advantage. I think Rahm Emanuel said, never miss an opportunity of a catastrophe, something like that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it was created for that effect. And like I said, I think it's something pathological, something in bigotry or racism that makes people not value black pain and black suffering on the same way they value white suffering.
I mean, it's a devaluation of black lives, and it affects our political response in general, and that's detriment to white people as well. If the framing of inequality is racialized in a way that the face of poverty is black, then that impacts the manner in which government reacts in general, which also, obviously, I'm not going to say the pain is equal. It hurts black people far worse, but spills over into white people as well. The benefit they get out of it is their relative status, that again, at least they're not black. Trump, the stuff you raised about Donald Trump, it is evident and clear that Trump is symptomatic of a deep-seated racism in America, period. It is also emblematic that Trump is revealing the fact that because of this large-scale vulnerability in general, a despotic leader like him can come along and people say, well, he's not acting in even poor white people's interests. Well, he is in a relative sense, if not an absolute sense. He is codifying the property rights and whiteness with his divisive language, period. So unfortunately, that's an immoral valuation of value, but it is something that he's able to capitalize on. Capitalize on. It's late in the day, and I had another talk earlier. That's why I'm babbling a little bit. But let me also say, with all that in mind, the man is an existential threat. That there are things about him that make him not business as usual. Not that we want business as usual, but I'm going to double down on the fact that we have to have a first and foremost condition where he gets removed from office.
People, there's this thing going on. I don't know where it came from, Doctor, that some people are so upset. And I was a Bernie supporter. I'm still a Bernie supporter. On his birthday, I text.
That was my birthday too, by the way.
Oh, what? Well, belated birthday, my brother.
Thank you.
No doubt. On his birthday, and on your birthday, I sent a DM to James Sanders, and I said, hey, Bernie Sanders was the one that convinced me that there were some politicians who didn't use black people as props for votes. That he was the one that convinced me that healthcare is a human right. These were all new ideas that I hadn't even considered growing up. If you didn't have insurance, black folks, put some, what Chris Rock say? Put some Robitussin on it. You better lay down. That's what you get for running around. Put some Robitussin on it. And you wouldn't go to the doctor, you better get up before you got to go to the doctor. Get out that ambulance. Don't you call that ambulance. I'll drive you. That's that's part of our story in America. So, and I told her, I said, hey, let Bernie know I still have his back. But there are some people where that having his back has turned a bitter to a point where I don't know. I'm not saying they're rooting for Trump, but they are indifferent to Biden in a way that is, I can't tell them to vote for Biden. They just form a revolt. They're just so upset. And they say, well, Donald Trump is going to bring, like Susan Sarandon said, Donald Trump will bring the revolution. It's hard to disagree with it with where we're at now. I don't know if that would have happened under Biden, even with what George Floyd did after being asphyxiated by those police officers. I don't know if that would have happened under George Floyd, my brother. Under a Biden-Harris administration. We had Tamir Rice under Obama. We had Eric Garner under Obama. We had so many others, Sandra Bland under Obama. And look at us now.
Yeah.
You get my dilemma of pushing, but so I try not to vote shame them, but I try to alert them to things Trump's doing specifically. Hey, those conservative judges in your state that Trump is putting are life appointments.
Yeah.
That's going to impact you, black man, when you go in there, and for whatever court case you go to, you got Jeff Sessions, Jeff Beauregard Sessions, as the vet Cornell would say, sitting at the table. I don't know if you want that. So what are some specific things about Trump, Dr. Hamilton, that you would say, hey, maybe you should think about this. Don't just think about Bernie getting the shaft. Think about this.
I mean, like I said, it fundamentally, the man is a narcissist in a way that he cares about himself and is willing to sacrifice anyone and anything in order to meet those selfish needs and desires. And the extent to which he will use anything to fulfill that is scary to me. You know, I won't be so arrogant to tell somebody how to vote. In fact, I should have humility and know that I don't know to tell them, you know, what life will bring. But I'm convinced that there is something not unique. There's something about Donald Trump that puts him as an outlier in ways that threaten, you know, us in ways that we probably couldn't imagine otherwise. Look at his handling of COVID-19 and his willingness to tell lies and distort information for political gain, right? That in and of itself is prima facie evidence of why I think he needs to be removed from office. You know, it ain't the same of Obama versus McCain or Obama versus, who's the other guy, Romney. This is not one of those elections. Donald Trump, again, is something different from McCain, is something different from Romney, where we have a different type of choice here.
Gotcha. And I've made those arguments. I use the issue about the sheriffs. I talk about COVID-19 and almost 200,000 people dead at this point. He said it'd be around 60 and it would magically go away. And then we caught him red-handed saying that, you know, hey, well, I didn't want to freak people out. I didn't want people to panic, so I downplayed it. If I got a disease, if I got, you know, something that needs to be taken care of, I want the opportunity to take care of it. I don't want you not telling me because you don't want to worry me. You know, somebody waiting for me outside. Let me know, doctor. Don't.
I mean, he's right now running around talking about his health plan that's supposed to cover pre-existing conditions that he's been promising from day one, and he keeps saying 2 weeks. So, you know, remember when he used us as props when he had the HBCU presidents come to the White House with Kellyanne Conway sitting on the couch without her shoes, all casual for that photo op. I'm proud to say my good friend and colleague Michael Sorrell, the president of Paul Quinn College, didn't go to that photo op. He had the wherewithal, and maybe I'm calling him out in ways I shouldn't, but I'm doing it in a proud way.
But you know, Doctor, Democrats, they do us the same way. I remember Hillary dragging Trayvon's mom around on campaign trail, and Eric Garner's mother or wife with her, and the young brother Jordan Davis, who the loud music, the guy who shot him, his mom around. And Democrats do the same thing. It's just, I feel like we really had nowhere to turn, but policy. I
mean, I'm mad that Barack Obama left us vulnerable to a despotic leader like Donald Trump in the first place. The fact that we had such growing inequality, you know, you cited Rahm Emanuel saying never let a political crisis go to waste. You know, sorry you cited Rahm Emanuel, but anyway, I think the point was we had an opportunity for transformative change to lead to economic inclusion. Sure, we didn't go into a depression and that we recovered from the recession, but we recovered with greater inequality and despair. And that inequality and despair allowed for somebody like Donald Trump to rise to power in the way that he did. And that to me is, you know, the vulnerability that was left because we didn't do more when we had the opportunity. And now we're faced with somebody like Donald Trump on the ballot, and that in my mind limits my capacities and to exercise some of the leverage I normally might be trying to exercise if it was a different type of person on the other side.
Well, speaking for myself, Doc, there's only one part of the contract for Black America I have issue with. And I think if any of my viewers and my Black viewers who are some of them borderline Pan-Africanists would say, Tim, why didn't you raise this? So I got to raise this. What's the part about the Native Americans?
I forgot that part.
Yeah, I'm like, what? Because, and it's not because, let me say this very clearly. It's not because I don't think the Native Americans deserve or don't deserve their just due and reconciliation and the amount of value of the land that was taken from them. I do believe that. But I just believe when you start bringing in others, what's going to stop our Hispanic brothers and sisters or our Italian? I hear all you don't know the crazy calls I get. I get Irish, people with Irish ancestry calling my show, equating it to slavery. So I already got to deal with that nutso stuff where they think indentured servitude is the same as chattel slavery, where in perpetuity, perpetually enslaved after death, when indentured servants, they look forward to a day of, being free. They didn't have this. So that's the only problem I have with it is why even introduce another group? And I don't know if they talked to you about that, or if you had an opinion on it or a response to that kind of loaded question, but it's there and it threw me for a second.
Yeah, I don't remember the part, and probably because I don't have as visceral reaction that you have to it, which obviously would probably speaks to my view on it. I'd say, identity, to think we have a problem in our society called multicultural liberalism, where we start talking about where everybody's faced oppression. So, what you belly and aching for, Black people? That's a problem, and I condemn that out of hand. That is, again, when Barack Obama gave his Philadelphia speech, the speech that everybody praised, that I thought was a really bad speech. One of the things he cited was Black people need to get beyond I wish I could remember word for word, I forget it, beyond the I don't know what he said, and I'm sorry to
on the soft shoe and get to work and put you. Is that the same speech?
All that stuff, but to get to this point, he said something about Black people need to bind their particular grievances with that of America, and I might be slightly paraphrasing. And then he started to list groups: the white woman struggling to maintain a job, the disabled person who blah blah blah, this person who blah blah blah. And I'm not saying that. Well, two things. One is we don't have a monopoly on oppression, and these are not legitimate things of injustice that needs to be addressed. They all do. But in that line, he was trying to, in a way, de-emphasize and trivialize the specificity of the harm that Black people have experienced in this country. That said, the indigenous population has gone through some stuff in the American quote. So the reference to, like, I don't remember the line, but a reference to some of their pain and suffering to me is not something that I would, you're not dismissing it, not something that I would, have a problem with out of hand. At the end of the day, I'm still a scholar, so I'm in the business of understanding power and the ways that identity matter in specific context. And that's another thing. I think intersectionality is an important, huge contribution to our understandings of power, inequality, and scholarship. But I think that the general public has sometimes takes it and misunderstands that context matters, that it's not just automatically that these combination of identities are necessarily worse off. I think the point and the nuance is that it's an interaction of identities in certain contexts that leads to certain types of consequences. And that's the point of intersectionality, that it's not so linear, that there's nuance. So there's nuance in identity, economics, and politics that are context specific. The American context is one where Black and white has been some of the paramount frames of inequality since our beginning. So we need to understand that and not trivialize it with a multicultural liberalism that links all these identities together and equates them as the same. But all that said, we can recognize the position of even the unique position of Native Americans, indigenous people in the American context, and know that justice was not, injustice was done to them. And then the final thing I'll say is that the ultimate goal where we get to is one where one's identity doesn't matter in a transactional sense. You know, I'm not one to, I want my blackness to always matter. Don't tell me you don't see race when you see me. That means I need to go do something. I need to grow my afro bigger if you don't see race. That's what that means. But, you know, I don't know, there should be no problem with an aesthetic or pride in appreciating one's ancestry, heritage. I don't have any problems with that. And the problem comes when we get transactional benefits or transactional sanctions because of one's identity, social identity, as it relates to material or psychological transactions.
Got it. And I appreciate you shining a light on that and clearing it up for me, because when you make it, you say it's more contextual. Well, it's because of the time, Tim Black. It's because we're talking about reparations based on, you know, slavery and Jim Crow, but also we look at slavery at that point in time. Native Americans, you can't ignore. It shows not to ignore the plight of Native Americans, indigenous people, and what they suffered and their land being stripped away. We need to consider that in the context of, if nothing else, just the history of America. And so I get it. It's just something I thought I should bring up. Dr. Hamilton, I want to thank you for giving us your time today. I think we're about an hour. What are you working on now? How can people follow you? How can people support you? And is there anything you want to let the audience know about?
I mean, I'm happy to be returning back to New York City, the new school. So shout out to the new school. You know, we're going to build this institute. We're going to build it from the ground up. You know, I guess another accolade that I'm proud of that I want to give recognition to, shout out to the Marguerite Casey Foundation as well as Group Health Foundation for starting an inaugural class of Freedom Scholars. There's a list of scholars on there that I'm a part of. And, you know, it's humbling as well as satisfying to be included in that group. I encourage everybody to take a look at the scholarship that's coming out from them. And the last thing I'll say is that, you know, I'm happy to partner with so many people, and I recognize that individually we aren't going to achieve the society we want, that collective efficacy and political action is going to bring about justice.
Well, you said humbled in your closing by your association. I'm humbled, my brother, by your ability to be here today and to share your vast experience, your depth of knowledge with my audience. We would so appreciate it. We got it straight from the horse's mouth, man, an economist, a professor who definitely knows this stuff. Thank you so much once again for sharing it with us. That's it, folks. I'm going to put the links in the description where to follow Dr. Hamilton, and please do so. That's it for Tim Black and the Power Hour.
Thank you, sir.